My name is Carol Reeves. I am 54 years old. I served 20 years in the United States Army. I have been to places most people only read about in the news, in conditions that would break someone who had not been prepared for them, and I came home from every single one. I am not telling you this to impress you. I am telling you because it is the context for what happened on a November evening 3 years ago, when my parents put my 8-year-old daughter outside in a storm and told her it would teach her a lesson. They forgot who I was. They forgot what 20 years of service produces in a person. They forgot that the woman who used to sit quietly at their dinner table and defer to their opinions and smooth over their cruelties had spent 2 decades being trained to assess a threat, make a decision, and act on it before the emotion arrived. The emotion came later, always later, in the quiet moments after the mission was complete. The mission came first. I made one phone call that night. What happened next, they never saw coming. But I need to start before that. I need to start where this story actually begins, which is not in the storm. It is in the 30 years before the storm, in the slow accumulation of a family that had a way of doing things, and a daughter who did not fit the way, and what that daughter did with herself, when she finally understood that fitting was never going to be available to her. Welcome to Cold Drama Stories. I want you to stay with me for all of this, not for the call, not for what came after, for the understanding that comes from knowing the full shape of a thing before you judge any piece of it. This is the full shape. I was not the daughter my parents planned on. My mother, Patricia, wanted a daughter who would stay close, who would go to the local college, marry a local man, have children who would grow up in the same town, attend the same church, sit at the same holiday table, in an unbroken chain. She had built a life in that chain herself, and she was proud of it, and she wanted to extend it forward. That is not an unreasonable want. Many women want exactly that, and find exactly that, and are nourished by exactly that. I have no quarrel with the want. The quarrel was that the want was never offered to me as an option. It was offered to me as a requirement, and I was, from a very young age, the kind of person who needed to understand the difference. My father, Gerald, is a man who believes in order, not cruelty. I want to be careful here, because I have spent years sorting those two things apart and they are distinct. He is not a cruel man by intention. He is a man who confuses control with love, who has spent his life arranging the people around him into positions that suit his comfort, and calling the arrangement care. When the arrangement was resisted, he experienced the resistance as ingratitude. When it was rejected, he experienced the rejection as attack. I was his most persistent resistor. Not through rebellion. I was not a rebellious child. Not in the ways people imagine when they use that word. I did not fight or rage or push against their rules in dramatic ways. I simply kept being myself, quietly and consistently, in the way that some people cannot help being themselves regardless of the environment's response. I read too much. I asked too many questions. I had opinions that I had formed from the questions and that did not always align with Gerald's. I was interested in the world beyond the town in a way that my mother experienced as a personal rejection of the world she had built inside it. I enlisted at 18. I made this decision with the specific clarity of someone who understands that there are environments in which they will grow and environments in which they will diminish, and who has identified which is which. The army was not an escape, it was a choice. A direction I turned myself in when I finally understood that the direction I'd been pointed was not mine. My parents did not come to my enlistment ceremony. My father said it was a phase. My mother cried for 3 days and then stopped calling for 6 weeks. When she started calling again, she never mentioned the enlistment. She talked about neighbors and church, and the cousin's new baby, and I learned to hold both things. The conversation we were having, and the conversation we were not having, and to be present in both without losing myself in either. That skill would serve me later. It serves me still. I served for 20 years. I will not detail every deployment because they are not the subject of this story, and because some of them belong to me and my fellow soldiers, and not to a wider audience. What I will tell you is that I came home different from how I left in the ways that service changes a person. More patient in large things, less patient in small ones. More aware of what actually matters and less interested in performing the pretense that things that don't matter actually do. I had seen people at their lowest and their highest, and I had learned that the distance between those two states is much smaller than civilians generally believe, and that what keeps a person on the right side of that distance is not luck or talent, but discipline and character, and the willingness to be honest about what you are actually dealing with. I came home with a daughter. Her name is Lily. She was born overseas, to a man I loved and lost in the way of people who love each other too much for the time they have, and too little for the time they don't. And I will not elaborate beyond that, because that story is hers, and she will tell it when she is ready. What I will tell you is that I brought her home at 3 years old, my daughter, my person, the 8 pounds of specific and necessary human being who had been handed to me in a hospital, and who looked up at me with her father's eyes and made me understand, in the way that only children can make you understand something, that everything I had done and survived and built had been in preparation for this. I would do anything for Lily. I want you to hold that sentence. I want you to carry it through the rest of this story, because it is the root of everything that follows, the thing that makes the call understandable, and the decision clear, and the outcome, in every sense that matters, right. I would do anything for Lily. We moved back to my hometown when Lily was 5. It was a practical decision. I needed the support network while I transitioned out of service, and my parents were there, and Lily deserved to know her grandparents, and I believed, or I tried to believe, that the people my parents had been when I was growing up could be different with a grandchild. That love for a grandchild sometimes opens doors in people that nothing else can open. There was truth in that belief. My mother loved Lily in the specific, uncomplicated way that grandmothers sometimes love grandchildren, without the ambition that complicated her love for me, without the disappointment that had always lived underneath her approval of my choices. She held Lily's hand at church. She taught her to bake the pie recipe that had been in her family for 3 generations. She called her sweetheart, in a voice I had not heard her use with me since I was very small. I was grateful for that. I held it carefully, and I was grateful. But the pattern was still there, the control, the arrangement of people into positions that suited Gerald's comfort, the correction of behavior that did not match the expectation. With me it had always been large, my choices, my career, my life direction. With Lily it was small, because Lily was 8 and the available territory was smaller. But it was there. The same instinct wearing a smaller costume. Lily is a curious child. She is loud in the way of children who are not afraid of being heard, which is a quality I work to give her deliberately, and which I will not apologize for. She asks questions at inappropriate moments, and tells the truth when a socially smooth lie would serve everyone better, and she laughs at things she finds funny, without checking first whether other people find them funny too. She is, in other words, everything I was at 8 before the years of correction taught me to make myself smaller. I watched my father try to make her smaller. Not cruelly. I keep saying that word because I keep needing it to be precise. Not cruelly, but consistently. Sit still. Don't interrupt. Stop asking so many questions. Children don't talk that way to adults. You're being too loud. You're being too much. You're being too much. I heard that sentence and I felt it in the specific physical way that you feel something that was once said to you. I felt it in my chest, in my hands, in the particular tension that comes from hearing someone direct at your child, the same instrument that was directed at you. I said gently, "The first time, Dad let her be herself." He said, "She needs to learn manners." I said, "She has manners. She has her own way of being in the world." He said something about respect. I let it go. I chose the long game. I chose patience because patience is what service teaches you when the situation requires it, and this situation required it. I was wrong to be patient this time. I have sat with that admission for 3 years and I have not been able to change it. I was wrong to choose patience. I was wrong to wait for my parents to grow into something they had never shown evidence of growing into. And the cost of my patience was a November evening in a storm that I will not describe to you without preparation, because it requires preparation. It requires you to know all of this first, before you can understand what it meant. The storm came from the north on a Tuesday in November. The forecast had been tracking it for 3 days, the kind of system that meteorologists describe with specific, careful language that translates in practice to, "This is serious, get inside." This is the kind of weather that does not forgive mistakes. I was 2 hours away. I had taken a contracting position that required occasional travel, and that Tuesday, I was in the city for a meeting that had run long, and was planning to drive home that evening. I had left Lily with my parents for the day, something I had done regularly, something that had seemed safe, something that was safe in the ordinary way of things that have not yet revealed themselves as otherwise. My mother called at 4 in the afternoon. The storm was strengthening. She said Lily was fine, but the roads were getting bad, and perhaps I should stay in the city overnight. I said, I'll be home before it hits. She said, Carol, stay. We have her. She's fine. I thought about it. I called the weather service directly, because 20 years of service had taught me to go to the primary source. The storm would hit between 7 and 9. I could leave by 5 and be home by 7, ahead of it. I said I was coming. I left at 5. At 6:15 my phone rang. It was Lily. She was calling from the neighbor's house, 2 doors down, a woman named Helen who is 70 years old, and who had opened her door to find my 8-year-old daughter standing on her porch, in the beginning of a November storm, in a light jacket, crying. My daughter said, Mummy, Grandpa put me outside. He said I needed to learn to behave. I will not describe to you exactly what I felt in that moment, because there are no words that fit it cleanly, and because I needed not to feel it yet. I needed to hold it. I needed to hear everything first. I said, Lily, are you inside Helen's house? She said, yes. I said, are you warm? She said, mostly. I said, put Helen on the phone. Helen came on. She was calm in the way of women who have lived long enough to know that calm is the most useful thing available in a crisis. She told me what she had seen. Lily on the porch in the beginning of the weather. No coat, no boots, just the light jacket she'd worn inside. She had been outside, Helen estimated, for at least 15 minutes before Helen heard her knocking. 15 minutes, in a storm that was strengthening, at 8 years old, for the crime, as far as Helen could determine from what Lily told her, of talking back. Talking back. My 8-year-old daughter, the one who tells the truth at inconvenient moments and laughs at things she finds funny and asks too many questions, she had said something my father had decided constituted talking back, and he had put her outside. I said, Helen, please keep her warm, I'm coming. I said, is she hurt? Helen said, she's cold and she's scared, but she's not hurt. I said, thank you, I'm coming. I hung up. I drove in the beginning of the storm. I will not tell you I was calm because I was not calm in the way I am usually calm. I was calm in the operational sense, focused, deliberate, hands steady on the wheel, driving at the appropriate speed for the conditions. But underneath the operational calm, something was happening that I recognized from the field. The specific clarity that arrives when everything irrelevant falls away and only the mission remains. The mission was Lily. The mission was getting to Lily. I prayed. I want to tell you that, because it is true, and because prayer is real to me, in the specific way it is real to people who have been in situations where there is nothing else available to do but give the thing to something larger than yourself. I prayed for the roads. I prayed for Lily's warmth. I prayed for the clarity to do the right thing when I got there, because I knew that when I got there I would need to do something, and I needed it to be the right thing and not the reactive thing. Lord, give me wisdom, not just strength, wisdom. I drove. I got to Helen's at 7:40. The storm had arrived. I carried Lily from Helen's porch to my car, my daughter who is small for 8, smaller than most of her classmates, in my arms with her face against my shoulder, and I felt her shaking subside as I held her. Not immediately, gradually, the way cold leaves a body when warmth arrives, slowly, from the inside out. I put her in the car. I turned the heat all the way up. I stayed in the driver's seat with the engine running, and I held her hand across the console, and I did not speak for a moment. I needed the moment. She said, Mummy, are you mad? I said, not at you. Not at you for 1 second. She said, I told Grandpa his story wasn't true. About the bridge. I said, which story? She told me. Gerald had told Lily a story about a bridge, a historical claim that I happen to know is disputed, and Lily, my curious, truth-telling, question-asking daughter, had told him she had read something different at school. She had not been rude, she had been honest. And he had told her she was being disrespectful, and when she held her position he had sent her outside. He had sent her outside in a November storm for disagreeing with his history. I sat with that for exactly as long as I needed to sit with it. And then I picked up my phone. I made the call. I need to tell you who I called before I tell you what came of it. Because the who is important and the why is important, and both of them say something about the 20 years that my parents forgot about. I did not call the police. I want to be clear about that. Not because the police would have been wrong to involve. What happened to Lily was reportable, was serious, was the kind of thing that Child Protective Services exists for, but because I had something more precise available to me. I called my former commanding officer, Colonel James Whitfield, who had retired from service 2 years before me, and who had, in retirement, built a second career as an attorney specializing in family law and specifically in cases involving child welfare. I had known James for 15 years. He had been at my enlistment ceremony in a capacity that had nothing to do with the Army. He had been there as the man who had recruited me, who had seen something in a stubborn 18-year-old girl and decided it was worth developing, who had spent 20 years being right about that assessment. I called him, and I told him what had happened. Briefly and in order, the way you brief a superior, with facts and timeline and outcome and current status. He listened all the way through. Then he said, "Carol, are you and Lily somewhere safe right now?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Don't go back to that house tonight." I said, "I know." He said, "Here's what I'm going to do." He told me. He had contacts in the county child protective services system, built through his legal work, and he was going to make 2 calls that evening. One to a colleague at CPS who handled emergency assessments. One to a family law colleague who specialized specifically in situations where grandparental visitation rights intersected with child welfare concerns. He said, "They forgot who you are, Carol. That is going to be a significant problem for them." He said, "Get some sleep. I'll be in touch in the morning." He made those calls that night, in a storm, on behalf of my daughter whom he had never met. That is what 20 years of service builds. Not just skills, not just rank, people. People who know who you are, and what you stand for, and who pick up the phone when you call. I am so grateful for the people. What happened next happened over days and weeks, not in one dramatic moment, and I want to tell it to you honestly, rather than theatrically, because you deserve the honest version, and because the honest version contains the wisdom. CPS made an assessment visit within 48 hours of James's call. My mother opened the door. My father was there. The assessor was professional, thorough, and unaffected by Gerald's certainty that this was an overreaction. She had been doing this work for 20 years. She had seen Gerald's particular certainty before. The report was not a removal. Lily had not been permanently harmed, but it was documented, recorded, an official record in the county system, with my parents' names and address and a description of what had occurred, a record that would follow any future concern. My father called it a witch hunt. He called me, after the assessment, and his voice had the quality it gets when he is cornered, which is louder than usual and more certain, the specific loudness of a man who has never been told no in a language he couldn't dismiss. He said, "This is completely overblown. She was outside for a few minutes. Children need discipline." I said, "Dad, she is 8 years old. She was outside in a storm without a coat for disagreeing with your bridge story." He said, "She was being disrespectful." I said, "She was being honest. I taught her to be honest. I am not going to apologize for that." He said, "You need to control that child." And there it was, the sentence underneath everything. The way Gerald had always seen the people he loved, as things that needed controlling, as situations to be managed, as arrangements to be made rather than people to be known. I said, "Dad, I'm going to say something now and I need you to hear it fully before you respond." He was quiet. I said, "Lily will not be spending time alone with you until you can demonstrate to me, specifically, and over time, that you understand the difference between discipline and punishment for existing. She is allowed to disagree with you. She is allowed to ask questions. She is allowed to be herself in whatever room she occupies, including yours. If that is not something you can live with, then she will not be in your rooms and you will not be in her life while she is in my care. That is not a negotiation. That is information." He said, "You can't do that." I said, "I can, and I will." He said, "I am your father." I said, "Yes. And I am her mother. And in any conflict between those two facts, there is no version of this where she loses." He hung up. I sat with the ended call for a moment. I expected to feel something, satisfaction, anger, grief. What I felt was stillness. The same stillness that comes after a decision that is hard and right, when the hard part is behind you, and the right part is what remains. Lord, I prayed again. Give her what she needs. Give me the wisdom to give it to her. Let this be enough. It was enough. Not immediately. Nothing that matters happens immediately. But over time, in the slow, patient way, that real change happens when it happens at all. My mother called me 2 weeks after I spoke to my father. She called in the morning, which is when she makes her most honest calls. and her voice had a quality I had not heard in it before, or had not heard in a long time. Stripped. Like the performance layer had been removed, and what was speaking was the woman underneath it. She said, "Carol, I need to tell you something." I said, "Okay, Mom." She said, "I knew he was going to put her outside." She stopped. I didn't stop him. I didn't say anything. I went into the other room, and I let it happen, and I have not slept since, because I keep seeing her on the porch, and She stopped. I waited. She said, "I should have stopped him. I have been not stopping him for 40 years, and I should have stopped him this time, and I didn't, and I need you to know that I know that." I held that. The weight of it. 40 years of not stopping. Not just with Lily, with me. All the time she had gone into the other room and let it happen. All the ways in which her silence had been its own kind of action, and she had called it not getting involved. She knew, she had known all along, and she was finally, at 68 years old, saying so out loud. I said, "Mom, thank you for telling me." She said, "Can you forgive me?" I thought about that question for a long moment. Forgiveness is not a simple thing, and I do not treat it as simple, because simple forgiveness is not real forgiveness. It is avoidance wearing forgiveness's clothing. Real forgiveness is a process, not a moment, a long, slow renegotiation between what happened and what you are going to do with it going forward. I said, "I'm working on it." That's the honest answer. She said, "That's enough. That's more than I deserve." I said, "How are you, Mom? Not about this. How are you?" And we talked. For the first time in perhaps 40 years. Without the performance, without the management, without the arrangement of ourselves into positions that suited someone else's comfort. We talked like two women who had been shaped by the same man in different ways and were, in their late 50s and late 60s, finally ready to look at each other across that shaping and see each other clearly. It was not a resolution, it was a beginning. I will take a beginning. My father took longer. I want to tell you that, because I believe in honest accounting, and the honest account of Gerald Reeves includes the fact that he is a man who has spent 7 decades building a self that cannot easily admit fault without the admission threatening the entire structure. That is not an excuse. It is a fact that I hold alongside the rest of the facts, including the porch and the storm and the 15 minutes and my daughter's shaking. He called in February, 3 months after the storm. He called on a Sunday, and his voice was different from the November call, smaller, somehow, as if something had been let out of it. He said, "I'd like to see Lily." I said, "I know you would." He said, "I understand if you say no." I looked at the ceiling of my kitchen. I thought about what Lily had said that morning at breakfast, out of nowhere, the way children say the things that are most important. She had said, "Mommy, do you think Grandpa is sorry?" I had said, "I think he might be getting there." She had said, "I hope so. I miss the stories. Even the wrong ones. Even the wrong ones." My daughter, who tells the truth at inconvenient moments, and forgives faster than I do, and loves bigger than I have sometimes managed to love. I said to my father, "Dad, I want to say something." He said, "Okay." I said, "What happened in November should never have happened. I want you to hear that without qualification, without context, without any framing that softens it. Lily was 8 years old, and she was outside in a storm because she disagreed with you, and that was wrong. Not boundary crossing, not overblown, wrong." He was quiet. I said, "I need you to say that, not to me, to her." He said, "I don't know if..." I said, "Dad, this is not optional. This is the requirement. You look at my daughter and you tell her that what you did was wrong and that she did not deserve it and that you are sorry. In those words. And you do not qualify it or explain it or ask her to see your side of it. You just say it." A long silence. Then he said, "I can do that." He came in March. I was in the room. I had told Lily beforehand that Grandpa wanted to say something to her, and that she could respond however she felt like responding, and that whatever she felt was right. She had nodded with the serious face she makes when she is processing something large. Gerald sat across from Lily at my kitchen table, and he looked at his granddaughter, and he said the words. Not fluently. He is not a fluent man when it comes to apology, but completely. He said what happened was wrong. He said she did not deserve it. He said he was sorry. In those words, without qualification. Lily looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, Grandpa, I forgive you." And then she asked if he wanted to hear about the book she was reading, because it had a bridge in it, and she thought he might like it. I had to leave the room, not because anything was wrong, because some things are too whole to witness fully and stay composed. I stood in the hallway of my house and I pressed my hand flat against the wall and I let myself feel it. The full weight of the November storm, and the 15 minutes, and the call, and the 3 months, and the March afternoon, and my daughter's voice saying, "I forgive you, and can I tell you about the bridge?" "Lord," I said quietly, "Lord, thank you. Here is what I want to give you. Not the call, not the CPS report, not the fact that Gerald said the words. All of that matters, but it is not the gift. The gift is this. When you are standing in a storm, not a November storm, the storms that live inside families, the ones that build for years from small accumulated pressures until they finally arrive in one night that changes everything. When you are standing in that storm, there are two things that will save you. The first is knowing who you are. My parents forgot who I was. They forgot 20 years of learning to assess a threat and move toward it with clarity, rather than away from it in fear. They forgot that the woman who used to smooth things over had learned, through 2 decades of service, the difference between patience that preserves something worth preserving and patience that allows harm to continue unexamined. They forgot that I am, at the root of everything, a person who does not leave her people behind. Know who you are, not who you were before the years changed you, not who other people need you to be, who you actually are, underneath the management and the accommodation and the careful performance of keeping the peace. That person is the one who needs to show up in the storm. The second thing is prayer. I know that word sits differently with different people, and I am not going to tell you what it has to mean for you or how it has to look. What I will tell you is what it meant for me on that drive in the November storm. It meant releasing the part of the situation I could not control, so I could focus everything I had on the part I could. It meant asking for wisdom rather than just strength, because strength without wisdom is just force, and force without direction does damage. It meant trusting that the road ahead was navigable, even when I could not see all of it. When you are in a storm and you cannot see all of the road, you drive toward what you can see. You trust the next mile, and the mile after that will reveal itself when you get there. Lily is 11 now. She is still loud in the way I work to make her, still honest at inconvenient moments, still laughing at things she finds funny without checking first. She is also, in ways I watch with specific gratitude, learning to forgive without forgetting, learning that forgiveness is not the erasure of what happened, but the decision not to let what happened determine who you become. She already knows this at 11. It took me 40 years. She is going to be extraordinary. My mother and I talk twice a week, not always about important things, sometimes about the pie recipe, the church neighbor, the weather, but the performance is gone, and what is left is real, and what is real is enough. We are learning each other at 68 and 54, the way we should have learned each other at 38 and 24. It is late. It is not too late. Gerald comes to dinner on Sundays. He is quieter than he used to be, which is a mercy for everyone. He and Lily play chess. She beats him sometimes. When she does, he makes a face that I have never seen him make before, which is the face of someone who is genuinely pleased to have been beaten by this specific person. It is a new face for him. I am glad he is learning it. I am still learning things too. Still learning the difference between the patience that serves love and the patience that protects no one. Still learning to speak sooner and more clearly, to trust that the people I love can handle the truth of who I am and what I need, to stop smoothing over the things that need to be said, rather than smoothed. Still learning that the mission does not end when the soldier comes home. It changes. It becomes smaller and more specific and more important than any deployment, more important than any mission I was given, with orders and a timeline. The mission becomes this: one child, one life, one morning at a time, one kitchen table, one book with a bridge in it, one forgiveness offered by an 11-year-old to a man who needed it more than he knew. That is the mission. That is always the mission. If you are a grandmother in your 50s or 60s watching this, and you know something of what Margaret knew, of what I know, the long years of smoothing over, the choices to go into the other room, the ways we participate in silence in things we know are wrong, I want to speak to you directly. It is not too late. It is not too late to call your daughter and say, I know. It is not too late to say, I should have stopped it. It is not too late to be the woman your grandchildren see when they look at you and wonder who the woman behind the grandmother is. You are still here. That is not nothing. That is the starting place. And if you are the woman in the storm, the one who got the call, the one with your child's voice on the other end, the one who has been patient too long with something that deserves action rather than patience, I want to speak to you too. You know what to do. You have always known. The question was never whether you had the capacity. The question was whether you believed the thing in front of you was worth the cost of the capacity. Your child is worth it. Your child has always been worth it. Get in the car, make the call, drive toward what you can see. The rest of the road will reveal itself when you get there. I am Carol. Lily is 11. She beats her grandfather at chess. Subscribe, leave a comment, tell me about the storm you drove through for someone you love. I will see you next time.